In this video, I'm going to be repairing this M2 Apple Mac Mini. Now, by just looking at it from the outside here, it looks pretty much completely normal as you'd expect, and in fact, the machine works exactly normally as you'd expect too, pretty much. But if we go ahead and take a look at the back of it here, you will immediately start to see what the issue is. So if we go ahead and take a close look here, and you start out by looking at those two USB-C ports there, you can see that they have been completely destroyed. Now, the HDMI port next to it, of course, is no exception. Both USB-A ports have also been attempted to be destroyed. However, looking at them, it looks like they would probably still work, even as they are. And of course, the Ethernet port as well has also been intentionally destroyed. Now, I don't really know why somebody would destroy the ports in something like this, because this was obviously intentional. There's no way, this was done by mistake. But it's still kind of puzzling what they were trying to accomplish here. Now, I have seen many of these Mac Minis on eBay with this damage just like this. So obviously it's something, people have decided on as maybe, I don't know, an effective method of disabling the board or destroying the data on it, even though there's still data on here. I really don't know. Now, this isn't my machine. This was actually sent into me by a friend of mine who actually bought it off eBay for $200. And obviously in this day and age, $200 is a really good deal for an M2 Mac Mini. And I have checked the serial number on it, and it is not iCloud locked. So definitely got a really good deal on this one, other than, of course, the ports being completely destroyed. So before I get started here, I am going to plug this machine in and show you that it does work. Now, of course, I'm not going to connect it to any keyboard, monitor, or mouse or anything with these damaged ports, because I don't want to risk, causing any more damage by actually plugging something into those ports in that condition. But we'll go ahead and take a power cord here and just plug it in, like so, and we'll just power the board on. And as you can see, it chimed as you'd expect, so the machine definitely is booting. So we'll go ahead and unplug that, turn it off, and the next thing we need to do is I want to get this board taken out of this chassis, take a close look at it, and then we will begin the process of sourcing a donor set of ports to install onto this board. Alright, so as you can see here, I've gotten the Mac Mini logic board removed from its chassis here, and just at first glance here, everything looks really good. You can see that the board itself looks like it's in perfect condition. There's not a single flaw on it anywhere. So literally the only thing that's a problem on this board are the intentionally damaged ports. So that is a really good sign. So with the board out here, let's go ahead and take an even closer look at those ports, and you can see exactly what I mean here by intentionally damaged. So you can see that Ethernet port there is really damaged with all those, all of its pins all messed up and mangled up there. Obviously both USB-C ports, as I showed you earlier, that HDMI port, and then of course those two USB ports there, which like I said, actually would probably still be usable as they are. But I still am going to replace them because the plastic is a little bit damaged. So yeah, like I said, I don't really know what someone did to damage these. It looks like they just stuck like a screwdriver or maybe some pliers in the ports and damaged them that way. But nonetheless, we need to replace all of them, as I said. Now, luckily for us, we actually have a very good source for these ports, because one device that happens to share the exact same port layout as this Mac Mini and the M1 Mac Mini and pretty much any Apple Silicon Mac Mini, unless of course it has 4 USB-C ports there, is the developer transition kit, and I just so happen to have a ton of those that are unusable. So let's go ahead over to the DTK graveyard and find one that we think is suitable to steal its ports. Well, here it is, the DTK graveyard. You can see I've got a whole box of DTKs right here, full pretty much up to the top. And these are all drilled, so unfortunately these are all completely unusable, as you can see right there. but in this case, they are perfect for using for parts. So let's just go ahead and find one here that has some good ports on it, like this one right here. And we'll use this one to steal its ports to fix the M2 Mac Mini. Alright, so as you can see here, I've got our donor DTK out on the board preheater, and I do not expect it to be very easy to remove these ports. These ports are big, they've got a lot of shielding and metal on them, so they have a lot of thermal mass, and that's going to make this process pretty difficult. But first thing we need to do is just get the board warming up on the preheater here, and then we'll remove all of these little EMI stickers here to expose the legs of the through-hole ports. Well, to make it even more difficult, looking at it closer here, you can see that there are actually little components in here intermingled between all these pins, so that's going to make this desoldering process extremely difficult. Maybe I'll get lucky enough and I can just use like hot air to just heat and just pull them out. That would be ideal, especially on the target board that we're actually repairing here. But first, let me just let it warm up, and then I think first thing I'll do is just try that hot air method, just kind of blast them with hot air with the preheater as well, and hopefully I can just kind of take them and just drop them out that way. Hopefully I can get this hot enough to where the ports come out. So let's get that warming up, and then I'll attempt that and see if that actually ends up working as expected. So one thing I didn't notice is there's these little black plastic pieces here that come through from the ports, and they are definitely trying to melt, but I think I'm just going to let them melt off because they really aren't needed, and doing it this way will just be a whole lot easier than manually desoldering all these pins with solder wick and such. I just want to make sure, of course, that the ports themselves don't end up melting. Okay, so that actually worked really well. Let's get the port that just kind of got away from me there. So yeah, if you take a look at that, that actually looks pretty good, minus those two plastic tabs that I melted. The rest of the port is perfectly intact, so that'll definitely work for our uses. So that's awesome. So let's go ahead and start desoldering the rest of the ports in the exact same manner. Here's the Ethernet port. There's the HDMI port. And this will likely be the most difficult port here, but this will be the audio jack combined with the two USB-A ports. And that's it. That's all the ports removed. So now I need to get the M2 Mac Mini logic board up here and just attempt to do the same thing again. Alright, so as you can see, we've got the M2 Mac Mini board up here now. So of course now we'll just do the exact same thing. And just like that, all of our bad ports have been removed. So now I'm going to flip the board over and see if I can't manage to wick all the solder out of these holes from the top side, so I don't have to deal with these shields or any of these components that are right in between the pins of each port. And then hopefully we'll be all good and we can solder the new ports on. Alright, so now with the board flipped over to the top side here, the first thing I want to do is apply some flux and some fresh leaded solder to all these pads, and that way it'll make the lead-free solder a lot easier to remove. So we'll go ahead and just start applying the flux here. So that's a good amount there, and then we'll take the soldering iron and just apply some leaded solder. Okay, we'll start with that there, and we'll just hope that I can simply wick all that solder out of these holes. And I have a feeling it's going to be easier said than done, but we'll see. Alright, so yeah, it's not really wicking very easily, so one trick I've found that tends to work pretty well is if you actually use hot air to aid in the removal of the residual solder. So I'm going to put my hot air on again, and we'll use that alongside the iron to remove all of the residual solder, and usually that works a little bit better. Actually, first thing I'm going to do is just get as much of the solder off with just the wick as I can, so that'll make it a little easier. Alright, so as expected, that was extremely difficult. I'm still not done, but I'm going to finish the rest of it off camera, and hopefully, you know, it'll go a little bit smoother. I would say just use the hot air and do not add extra solder, because that actually made it a whole lot harder, which is actually usually not the case. So for the next ones, I'm just going to leave the original solder there, just add flux and use the hot air with the iron on the solder wick to remove it that way. So I'm going to finish it off camera and come back, and then we'll begin the process of installing the new ports. Alright, well, as you can see here, I've gotten all the pads wicked, and let me just tell you, that was an awful process. That took so long. Through-hole stuff just absolutely sucks to work with. I would much prefer if these were SMD ports, because that would make this process way easier and way quicker. But regardless, I've gotten everything cleaned up here, all the pads wicked, as I said. If we take a look at the bottom here, you can see that it is a little bit messy under here just because of all the flux that went through the holes, but is still, you know, clean enough to, you know, use in this condition. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to solder on the Ethernet port, and the reason for that is, as you can see right here, it's got 3 SMD ground pads here and 3 SMD ground pads back here, and I'm going to use the preheater with the hot air to seat this connector before I solder the through-hole parts of it there. So let's get it back on the preheater once again, and we'll get this Ethernet port soldered on. Alright, so as you can see, I've got the Ethernet port section here on the preheater, so let's go ahead and just apply a little bit of flux on there like so. And then we'll just tin all of these SMD pads here. Alright, and with those tinned, we will take our good Ethernet port right here. As you can see, all of the pins in there are intact from our DTK. Take that. Get it in position there, and then I'm just going to heat it with the hot air to get those pads soldered. Alright, and I think that's good right there. So now it should be pretty much on there. Yep, so now that's not going anywhere. So now I'm going to take it back off the preheater, and then we'll just begin the process of soldering all of the through-hole components. Alright, so as you can see, I've got the board ready here, so now all we need to do is just install all of the through-hole ports here, that we took off of the DTK, and then we can begin the process of soldering all the pins. So we'll start with the USB-C port assembly here. That goes in like so, just making sure all the pins went through as expected. Okay, yeah, that looks good. Next, of course, is the HDMI port. Got that installed, and lastly, we've got our USB-A and audio port assembly here. And that just goes on like that. So now it's looking much more complete once again. So of course now we need to flip it over and solder all the pins into position. Guess we'll start over on this side with the Ethernet. Just a tiny bit of flux on there, and then we'll just take the soldering iron and solder each pin into position. Alright, and it looks like it will actually be a lot easier to do this on the preheater because the ground plane in this board is so thick that it's sinking way too much heat from my iron. So let's get it back on the board preheater once again, and we'll finish the soldering process on there. Alright, so as you can see here, all the ports have been soldered on successfully. Everything looks good. All the ports are even, flush with each other, and flat against the board as you'd expect. So if we go ahead and flip it over here and take a look at the bottom, all the pins here are soldered. Soldering all these actually took quite a long time, but I got it done and everything looks really good there. So yeah, now the next thing I want to do is hook it up to a keyboard, monitor, and mouse and give it an initial test. Alright, so as you can see here, I've gotten a power supply and keyboard, monitor, and mouse hooked up. So let's go ahead and plug it in, turn it on, and see if everything works. So of course we'll be testing both USB ports and one of the USB-C ports. Okay, that's a good sign. Oh, and look at that, we've got video. So that means at least that USB-C port works. Let me try the other one real quick. And that one works too. That's a really good sign. So it looks like this has a fresh copy of Ventura on it. So let me go ahead and set this up, and then we'll take a look and test everything else. Make sure all the ports work, and then we'll reassemble it. Alright, so as you can see, I've gotten the copy of Ventura set up here. So let's go ahead into About This Mac. You can see there that this is, of course, a base model M2 Mac Mini. with 256 gigs of storage. And activation lock is indeed disabled. That's good. I would expect that since it was a, first time setup there. But yeah, everything looks good so far. So let's go ahead and connect Ethernet to it, and we'll make sure the Ethernet port works as intended. Okay, we got Ethernet connected, so let's check the status of that. And we are connected, so Ethernet's working with that new Ethernet port. Let's go ahead and open up Safari here. And yep, that works. We've got an internet connection now over Ethernet. So the only thing left I need to test is HDMI and the audio port, but I'll do that later off camera before I reassemble it. But yeah, I'm very happy with the results there. So now let's get the board back on the workbench and we'll reassemble it back into its chassis. Alright, so I've got the board out here. I got the heatsink on, but we'll just go ahead and reassemble the rest of it here. So the first thing I've got here is a new I/O plate to replace this one, which obviously has a lot of damage from where whoever stuck something in there and tried to damage the ports with. So we'll install this one. Of course, it's the same as the M1 Mac Mini. So we'll put that on just like so. And everything looks good there. All the ports are aligned, so that means, they're soldered in their correct positions, which is good. So now we'll just route all these antenna cables and get the rest of it reassembled. And there we go. That is a fully repaired Apple M2 Mac Mini. So let's hook it up one more time and give it a final test. Alright, so we've got the M2 Mac Mini hooked up again, so let's power it on. And there we go. Everything is still working. Yep, got working USB again. And I have tested the other ports, including HDMI and the audio port, and both of those work as well. So that has been the full repair of intentionally damaged ports on this M2 Apple Mac Mini. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this video.